Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am really thrilled to be speaking to Frit Tam and Frankie Dewar about Frit's Glide for Pride, which took place between May and July this year, which was a 1,000-mile journey by rollerblade and bicycle across England. And the aim of the adventure was to showcase LGBTQIA plus stories and narratives. And Frankie being very much part of this whole adventure too, I just thought it'd be a brilliant chance to speak to both of them as they've recently launched a crowdfunder in order to try and raise money for the film, which they are trying to make so that the stories and narratives that they heard along the way and that this journey reaches as many people as possible. So those of you who've been listening to this for a while may well remember that I spoke to Frankie back in episode 23 of season 1, which seems like quite a while ago now. So she was brave enough to come and be one of my very first guests on this show. And that was just as Frankie was actually undertaking her own adventure, cycling 3,000 kilometres around the UK, speaking to women older than herself about their own concepts of adventure. And Frankie's podcast, Extraordinary Ordinary You, has recently gone on to win the She Extreme Film Festival Podcast Award, which is so amazing because those were the recordings that she did while she was on that journey and has turned this the most incredible podcast. So I'm so thrilled. So many things have happened since I think we spoke the first time. So it's just brilliant to be able to catch up with you, Frankie, and obviously speak to you as well, Frit, because although like I said, we've connected on social media and I feel like I know you. I don't think we've ever actually spoken in person. So this is amazing. I'm really excited to sort of get both of their perspectives. And just before we came on, one of the things that I said was, well, often when I speak to people about adventures, they'll talk about, well, it wasn't just a solo effort. There was lots of, there were people behind the scenes and it was a team effort, but you sort of get one perspective. And that's why I thought today actually to speak to both Frit and Frankie about this, because it was so much a team effort. And I know there were other members of your team too, about this extraordinary effort. I mean, I've never rollerbladed, but God, I don't think I'd get down the street. I know what my skateboarding's like. So yeah, just really incredible. So thank you so much for joining me. It's really lovely to have you here today.
Thank you so much. No, it's so lovely to be here and to chat to you. And sort of, as you said, we spoke to each other when I was on my cycling trip. And so to go from that to all the way past this second journey as well, it's really magic to be here.
Just thank you so much for having us on. I mean, as we sort of said before we started the recording, this is the first time that Frankie and I have been interviewed together for a podcast. So we'll see how it goes. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine.
and likewise, my first time doing a sort of more than one person podcast. So between us, I'm sure we'll get through it, but it could be quite an adventure in itself. I was just wondering, to start off, I was wondering if you could sort of give me because obviously, I mean, Frankie, you took on this amazing journey on the bicycle, which, was incredible in itself. And so I know both of you are no strangers sort of to big adventures and living in a sort of adventurous way. But I think what really inspired the idea behind Glide for Pride, where did it come from?
So originally, there were many facets to the original idea. One was sort of a very personal desire to feel more connected to the LGBTQIA plus community that I already felt like I had quite a good bond with, but I was very aware that my circle of LGBTQIA plus friends still had quite similar life experiences to me. And at the time, I didn't know any intersex or asexual or aromantic people. And I just felt as if I needed myself to broaden my own horizons, to understand my community better, because I felt this really strong pull to be a better advocate for the community. I just didn't know how. And so I thought the only way to really understand how I could help the community better would be if I fully understood the experiences that we all had. So there was that side of things, but then there was also the physical element of it. I'd obviously seen Frankie do her challenge, and knew myself that I wanted to do a physical challenge, but I just had no idea what that would look like. And I remember that as a kid, I wanted to learn how to skate in some sort of form. And I had a skateboard, but when I was younger, but didn't really use it. And for some, I don't know how I came across it, but for some reason I came across rollerblading marathons. I thought, right, if you can rollerblade a marathon, then you can obviously cover some kind of distance. So I just kind of plucked it out the air as an idea, but realised that sort of the average pace of rollerblading would probably not take me across the country within a period of time that I needed to do it in. So I added cycling to it. And then those two facets of the idea just kind of merged together as this idea of, well, I'll just travel around the country via some kind of wheels, and I'll interview LGBTQIA plus people and try my damned hardest to make sure that I interview at least one person from every letter in that acronym, so that I could try and do my best to relay as broad a spectrum of stories as possible from our community. So yeah, that's kind of how the idea came about.
Amazing. And I guess, I mean, I think it's like I was saying to you before, I mean, the thought of rollerblading it must have been quite, I would imagine, challenging from a physical perspective, if nothing else. I mean, had you rollerbladed before? Was this something you'd come across, or like was your first time when you set off on this?
I learned to rollerblade for the challenge. So prior to that, I'd never actually owned a pair of rollerblades, and I thought, okay, as long as I can go in a straight line, I'll probably be fine. So I started teaching myself how to rollerblade, and as long as I could, as I said, go in a straight line and learn how to stop, then I thought maybe I'd be able to be in with a bit of a chance to be able to rollerblade sections of the route. Turns out street skating, as it's known as, is the hardest form of skating that you can do, because the terrain varies so much. If you're skating at a skate park, for example, or within sort of a smaller area that you've maybe recce'd before, then you know what the terrain is like, and you know that it's either designed for skating, or you know that you're within an area in which you can skate. Whereas with street skating, you're just skating along the street. So the terrain changes and people get in your way, and there's lampposts and signs and bins and sand on the, I mean, at one point I came across just a heap of sand that was that just been sort of dumped onto part of the pavement, and then with cars driving over it, because it was a drop curb into a driveway, it flattened out. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just skate over that, but didn't. I skated into it and it brought me to a complete halt. And so there's things that you just come across that with street skating that you just don't come across in any other form of skating. So it was actually really hard. But we still managed to rack up some sort of mileage with the skating, and I guess that's sort of all that matters, really.
No, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, I think my image of rollerblading is mainly the sort of, when you see the Californian boardwalks and people just sort of gliding along, looking effortless. I can imagine it probably wasn't very much like that at all. So I didn't even think about the people. God.
I think it's hard as well, because so often you'd end up doing it like right next to a main road. And yes, you're on the pavement, but if you're on the pavement and you might at any moment get thrown off into the middle of the road, that's like petrifying.
Yeah, pavements are not the same width everywhere across the country. So there was just lots of things to navigate, and it was, more than anything, the skating was actually mentally hard rather than physically hard. You just had to be switched on for the whole time to make sure that you were safe. But it was still a really great part of the experience, and one that I wouldn't change, although it would have been nicer if I'd learnt to skate when I was younger and was now just drawing upon previous experience. But sure, this is just what you have to start somewhere, don't you? So yeah, this was my start.
No, definitely. It reminds me, I think I've had conversations definitely with previous guests where they've sort of said, part of getting started is sort of a healthy dose of naivety, that actually sometimes not quite knowing what you're getting into can be the spur. And if you really did know, probably you wouldn't even have tackled it. I was also reminded of trying to teach my kids to cycle along the pavement and how terrifying it is. So what are the other challenges that you face there? Because obviously the skating, like you said, there's the immense physical and mental challenge in learning a new skill and that side of things. But I mean, putting together a sort of it's an expedition in many ways. We don't tend to talk about expeditions in the same way in terms of urban adventures, or you sort of have in mind beaten tracks and far-flung countries and things. But I mean, this very much seemed, from all the planning you were doing, that it was an expedition you were going on. I mean, what were some of the challenges that you came across?
I mean, firstly, that's very kind to call it an expedition. I think you're right, just to address that just calling it a trip maybe doesn't encompass every small to large facet of the logistics of the trip. And someone recently called it a tour of England, which was quite nice, actually. I quite like that, because that sort of had an extra element of sort of grandiose that, again, trip or even challenge sometimes doesn't have. Some of the other challenges are, so I found on the trip that I didn't experience any overt homophobia or transphobia on the trip. And I was thinking about that quite a lot, actually. And before I'd set off on the trip, I did some work with my coach, who's called Darren, really lovely guy. We've been working together for quite a while. And we sort of went through different scenarios of what would happen if I did experience homophobia or transphobia, and how I would keep myself safe. And I was quite worried about that before I set off. But actually, whilst I was on the trip, I realised that I wasn't wearing anything that was rainbow coloured, or that would sort of provoke any kind of knowledge about why I was doing my trip and the community that I was advocating for. So actually, in hindsight, I had nothing to worry about there. But what I did find was that people would express an interest in my trip. So they would see me cycling along or rollerblading, and then places where I stayed, the people who owned those places would ask me, where am I going? What am I doing it for? And what I found was that I would self-censor sometimes. So I wouldn't want to sometimes tell them what the trip was for, who I was, and it was interesting that I would constantly be making judgment calls on, is this person a safe person to tell all of this information to, or am I opening myself up to potentially being in a dangerous position if I did? So that was an interesting obstacle that I felt like I was constantly navigating as I was going along the trip, and particularly because I was going into quite rural parts of England. I really wanted to make sure that I did visit cities, but it's quite sort of easy to find several members of the LGBTQIA plus community in cities. And that's something that I touched upon with my second interviewee, Phil, and he taught me this term, queer migration. And that's essentially where people from rural or suburban parts of the country flock to cities because there are higher chances of you finding other members of the community and services that will support our community in a cityscape as opposed to more rural parts. But I wanted to make sure that I visited those rural parts to show that we are everywhere. We live in all parts of the country, and it shouldn't just be the case that we have to move to really expensive parts of the country in order to feel more comfortable and at ease with ourselves. So that was one challenge that I came across. And then another was my mental health. So that was a part that Frankie saw a lot of, more so than anyone else. And essentially my mental health started to decline quite quickly on the trip. And there's a variety of reasons why that happened. But I'd never done a trip like this before. I'd never planned a trip that would take me away for this period of time before. As I said, I'd only just learned to rollerblade. I'd never cycled this sort of distance before. And also on top of it, because I'm a filmmaker and we were filming the trip, I found that I couldn't sort of switch that part of my brain off to just let the people who were filming me, like Frankie, just do the filming and just for myself to detach and just become the subject. So I found at times that I was micromanaging my team and getting involved in places where I didn't need to get involved, which was taking up my headspace. But in hindsight, what I realized is that because I felt like I was losing control in other areas of the trip, just because it was all so new, so everything was so overwhelming. So I was just scrabbling for areas that I felt like I could control. So the filming side of things is a really obvious place where I would try and gain some control, because it's something that I do for my job. So I know the ins and outs of it. So in hindsight, I realized that that's what I was doing, but it wasn't helpful, and it started to fracture relationships, and it also was eating into time when I should have been resting. So I wasn't resting on the trip. I had rest days planned, but I wasn't resting. And all of it had an accumulative effect where it got to the point where in the last third of the trip, perhaps, I'd really dipped into quite a low point where I was really easily overwhelmed. I couldn't make any new decisions. If anything came into the schedule for that day that then changed things, even just by a small amount, I didn't have the capacity to understand whether that was a good change or a bad change. It just felt like a bad change. And Frankie really had to prop me up for a lot of the last third of the trip, really, just to keep me going and just to keep me positive and just to remind me of why I'm doing the trip, and that really deep down I'm really enjoying this, but the many layers on top of it are feeling like I'm not enjoying this at all. So there was a lot there that I felt like I didn't have the space to unpack and process at the time, and it really took me a good couple of months after the trip to really feel as if I'd started to recover from it all. And there is this term of a post trip blues or post expedition blues, and that's a real thing that a lot of people have done research into. And I remember reading a blog post by Cal Major where she talked about it really candidly, about her own experiences of it. And that was really nice to just hear someone say, this is a depression that I've experienced after coming back from a big trip, and this is really real. And it's really weird because obviously you come back from the trip and you're like, well, shouldn't this be a relief that I don't have to do the trip anymore? And I feel really, I should feel really satisfied and rewarded and proud of myself for having completed this trip. But instead you kind of descend into this sort of losslessness and lack of motivation. And I think I experienced that, but then coupled with my deteriorating mental health along the trip just meant that I had a really big mountain to climb at the end of the trip afterwards, when no one was watching, that I felt like I had this big mountain to climb to really try and heal myself so that I could come back in a way that was positive for the trip. And so I could continue to then sort of do the next steps to then make the film so that we can share these stories, as you said at the start of this episode. So yeah, those are just a couple of the things that I experienced along the way.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking as you're talking as well, you talk about those different layers as well, actually, that, how much you're sort of carrying when you do an expedition like this, that's not necessarily just about your own achievement, but that you're also carrying a lot for a lot of other people as well. And actually, like you said, that coupled with the sort of the physical toll it takes on you as well, I can imagine it must take a long time to work through a lot of that. And Frankie, I was just wondering, because it must be, as somebody who was sort of witnessing this or, having to provide that support and being there. And, what were the main challenges for you that you faced as you were going through this?
Yeah, definitely. It was hard. And I kind of just want to start by picking up on what you said and saying that I think so often we talk about the outdoors as this great place that you can go to help your mental health, and that doing a big trip or a big expedition, there are lots of stories of people who are struggling, who go on a trip and who feel better. And that is the reality for some people. But also I think people forget that actually, if you're struggling and you go on a trip, you'll still probably be struggling, because it doesn't change things, it doesn't make things go away. So I think it's so powerful just to even be talking about it and to put that awareness out there. It is really hard being support crew, and I knew it would be hard. I've got a bit of a background in trail races and endurance races, and I know how hard it is to support people on big trips and big expeditions, but I never really knew how hard it would be. And I remember actually when I was doing my cycling trip, Frit would film me, and I'd get in after a day of cycling and I'd be like, oh, I'm exhausted, like I really hope Frit's like made dinner and is ready. And Frit would be like asleep on the bed, and I'd be like, fine, well, I'll just put all my kit away, tidy the van and make dinner then, like who's doing this trip? I could never understand why. And then, oh my goodness, I was exhausted at the end of Frit's trip, like so exhausted. And as you say, like talking about the mental health, I think as like support crew, often you end up taking a lot of decisions, like, do you tell the athlete to keep going or to stop? And sometimes that's a physical thing. Sometimes they might have pain, and, you know, they're like using you as a sounding board to say, do I keep going or do I stop? And you're the one that's supposed to be there like, no, keep going. But there were definite moments on your trip for it where I was like, wow, like, I don't know, like, is this now morally right to tell you to keep going, or should I tell you to stop? And then there's so many different outcomes weighing in on that decision that it becomes like a really heavy and really difficult thing to hold. You know, you don't want to tell someone to keep going if they're going to end up really hurting themselves, but also you don't want to tell someone to stop if actually they could have kept going and they just needed someone to be positive and a little bit of support and a little bit more encouragement. So that was definitely like the weight of that responsibility was like probably the hardest thing to hold. And I think at the same time, I was also in a super stressful role within the trip. So I don't entirely know that my judgment wasn't also clouded. It's not like I was coming fresh from an outside perspective and I could see exactly what was going on. The filming itself, so originally we had Rachel Sarah filming with us, who's a fantastic filmmaker, but she broke her arm. And when she broke her arm, I stepped in and I was only supposed to be support and additional filming. And I became the sort of the main filmer of the trip with very little filming experience. And the responsibility of feeling like I had to capture every single moment that happened, from when Frit woke up to when Frit went to bed, and the fear that something would happen and I would miss it and the film would be ruined, was huge. And it would just be every single day from 6 until whatever time we went to bed, that there was just this pressure. So holding both of those things together was, yeah, it was an experience.
I'm still together. I was about to say, on the plus side. And, you know, I mean, I think the first thing I just want to say is, you know, thank you both of you for being so honest as well about that, because like you said, we so often hear about, you know, all the great things that happen on adventures or expeditions, or like you said, that it's this sort of life-changing thing. And I think that point that you made, Frankie, about this is still real life. You know, you might be away doing something, but you still bring yourself with you, and all of those things are still there, and you might pause them, but like you said as well, it can exacerbate them. And you know, being able to be honest about that and go, you know, it's not all singing and roses, and wouldn't that be lovely, but this is also life, I think is so important. So thank you. And I guess you know, I know you set out with an aim as well, in terms of, you know, this is what we wanted to achieve. This, you know, these are the benefits that we want to to bring, and like you said, sharing the story, all those stories and those narratives. But I guess, what have been the unexpected benefits for you in completing something like this? And like you said, actually not completing it, because you're still sort of halfway through the process in the end of having completed the trip, but now having to get it all out there. I mean, what have been the things that have happened? You just got, wow, I never expected that, and that was just amazing.
Let me have a little think.
Shall I go first? What do you
Yes,
think? I'll go first.
Okay.
So as someone who's pansexual, I haven't always felt safe necessarily within queer spaces or within queer communities. I haven't always felt like, I felt like I'm maybe like not gay enough to be there. And so I've not always necessarily sought out those spaces or those narratives or those stories, or I've not really looked for myself in other people's stories and experiences. And actually what happened during Frit's trip is I would sit in on almost every interview to monitor the cameras and monitor the audio. And so I got to listen to almost every single interview with the 37 people that Frit spoke to along the way. Yeah.
Wow.
And what I found that was really beautiful was from almost every interview, there was one moment or one story or one little thing where I could see myself in that. And we've all got such different experiences and backgrounds and stories and needs, but there are these little threads that like tie you together. And I didn't even know that I was necessarily missing that. And so it was completely unexpected to find it.
That's nice. That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, off the back of that, I would say that a benefit for me that I got from the trip was, even though I knew that I would be experiencing other people's stories, I don't think I really realized the full breadth of all of our stories. And even though I felt like I did gather a whole load of stories that do give a relatively good reflection of just how diverse our community is, I still feel like there's probably so many stories that I still haven't come across. And the fact is that we are a huge community. I don't think I really appreciated just how big a community we really are. I mean, we've kind of all been lumped together in a bit of a strange hot pot of people with a gender identity and people with a sexual orientation. And our common theme that sort of pulls us all together is that we've experienced some kind of oppression due to those two things. But the fact is that we're all hugely individual. And so even though the way that we feel that society has oppressed us is similar, we all come from every facet of life possible. And, so, there's everything from age to ability, physical ability, to social economical backgrounds, to ethnicity. I know I'm missing a whole bunch of things there. I probably shouldn't have started listing them.
It's just life experiences, isn't it?
But that's exactly, I think the thing is that like we feel, I think when we all come together, and when I'm sat with another person of the community about to interview them, I feel safe. There is a fundamental part of me that doesn't feel safe in lots of environments. But when I sit down with this person to interview them, I immediately feel safe about something that I want to feel comfortable about. And then we sit down and we talk, and their story is full of things that I have no idea about. And so every interview was a learning experience for me about what it's like to, for example, be a transgender Catholic teacher in a Catholic school, an RE teacher in a Catholic school, or what it's like to be a member of the community with cerebral palsy, or what it's like to be in your 70s and to be delivering diversity and inclusion training for companies and businesses. or what it's like to be a gay man homeless in France. There are so many life experiences that I just know nothing about. But we can still sit together and have this really deeply understanding conversation with each other, because there's a really big part of ourselves that we both, without having to say it, accept. And I think the thing that I didn't expect was just how much I was going to learn about my community from doing the trip, and just how diverse our stories really are. And we really do touch upon every facet of society, and our existence is so intersectional. I didn't really have that appreciation of that before I started the trip. And I think even now I'm maybe only 50% to the way of fully being able to appreciate and understand that. But I definitely have a better understanding of that now that I've finished the trip and met these people and heard their stories.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I was just thinking, you know, as you were talking about, you know, that word intersectional, because I think it's certainly come up in so many conversations that I've had with people as well around this element that, like you said, that things tend to, and that we seem to be more comfortable with putting people in categories and defining them as this thing or that thing. And I was speaking to a Black woman the other day who was saying the similar thing, that people want to speak to me on the basis of me being Black, and that's a really important part of my identity. But also a part of my identity is being a woman who is Black and from a particular area, and all of these things, and the social economics. And unless you explore all of those aspects of people's stories, that you produce these sort of one-dimensional ideas. And like you said, then we fall into this sort of prescriptive, narrow idea of who people are and the experience that they've had. And I just thought that point you made as well, Frankie, about learning about yourself through the process of learning about other people, and that whilst people's experiences are so vast, at the same time there's commonality in feeling that this is a place where you can share them too. And I mean, just leading me on to thinking about, you know, you're at the process of wanting to make this into a film and to make sure that these stories reach out much more broadly across, you know, across not just the adventure space, I think, because I think it's also interesting, that thing that stories tend to get lodged in, okay, this is about adventure or this is about an expedition, whereas actually this is about human experience. And I know you've recently launched a crowdfunder to try and raise the money for it. And I was just wondering, you know, where would you like this to go? What were your sort of plans and hopes for this film, and where you'd like to get to?
I can't remember who said it. Was it you, Frankie? You said world domination.
I like big ambitions. That's good.
Someone said world domination. I can't quite remember who it was. Someone in the team. Essentially, I suppose, aim big, yes, world domination, but more so in the sense of helping to inform others about the experiences of the LGBTQIA plus community. Because if I, as someone who, so my identity is as a transgender man, but I'm very early in the stages of my transgender journey. And so I have my own processes and experiences of that, and having lived life identifying as a lesbian woman before, I've got experiences of those things. And so as I said sort of before, I've always felt quite deeply connected to the community, but there was still so much of the community that I really knew nothing about. And if I feel that way as someone who has a deep connection to the community, then if you're an ally, if you're not part of the LGBTQIA plus community, then actually there's a really steep learning curve there. And so I feel as if we can have as much material as possible that can help to inform other people about our experiences, then that can only help to hopefully even things out across society in terms of the way that the community feels that they're being treated by society. And also, you know, a really big thing that I wanted from the very start was to help support anyone who felt as if they were in those early stages of questioning their sexual orientation or their gender identity, because those are some really big questions that you're asking of yourself. And if you don't have the resources to lean on to be able to fully understand who you are, then you're left floundering a little bit. And I think there are a huge number of people, I think even up to sort of our generation, who felt as if we didn't have the resources to be who we are and to not be questioned and not be treated differently because of it. And so I hope that in future generations, and from the people that I've interviewed who are from the generations younger than us, I'm really hopeful for the progression of our community and society. But I also received lots of messages during the trip and even now from people who are just beginning to question those parts of themselves and just beginning to understand, and seeing Glide for Pride and seeing the stories that I've been putting out there from people that I've been interviewing. It's given them, I suppose, role models of people who are living a life in a way that those people who are questioning would like to see themselves also living their lives. And so that was always my biggest hope for this, was that it would give hope to anyone who is in those early stages to know that you are absolutely fine. There is nothing wrong with you. Take as long as you like to work out this part of yourself, but just know that there is a community, a really huge community, who fully understand these experiences that you're going through. And if you want to, you can lean on the community to do that, because there are people within this community who, as we've talked about before, who have every type of life experience. So there will be someone there that you can connect with. But if we don't have these resources more readily available, then where do these people go, and how do they know that they can ask these questions and that they can reach out to people? So that's my biggest hope for Glide for Pride and for the film, is just to give people an avenue to, well, number one is to give people permission to ask questions about themselves. And number two, give them an avenue to be able to reach out to some people who may be able to help answer some questions that they might have about themselves.
I mean, yeah, again, I think when you talk about world domination, going back to the first comment you made, but like you said, actually, and and I think also that point that I think you made, Frankie, earlier about actually having those stories visible, how important that was for you. And I suppose that's such a huge part in terms of providing a language for people, providing a space for people to talk about issues that they may have no experience of or understanding of, but also for people who are deeply affected by this, raising that visibility and just saying, look, here are some stories, here are some people who are living, who have found their own way to navigate through this. I can imagine it, that's really powerful. And I was just thinking from all the interviews, I'm changing my question slightly from the one I sent you, so I'm sorry, but that's not sorry, but it's my podcast, so fine. But so I was just wondering, from all the interviews that you've done and the stories you've heard from people, I mean, what has been the thing that stayed with you? What's been the, either a message that you heard? What's the thing that stuck with you that you think, actually, either I wish I'd known this before, or that's something that's made a big difference to me?
There's quite a few.
I expected there would be. Don't worry. You're not limited to one, by the way.
Great, thank you. I mean, so as I mentioned before, the term queer migration, when I learnt about that, and is it the first day that it must have been the first day of the trip, we met Phil from Curious Arts. And that really stuck with me, because I've had that lived experience. I moved to Brighton, of all places, because I just felt as if I needed to find other people who reflected me. And so that was really interesting. I really enjoyed learning more about what it means to be intersex and the different variations of being intersex from somebody called Anik that I interviewed in London. And that was just really eye-opening for me, in terms of, I felt like I was asking them really basic questions, but I just had very little understanding of what it meant to be intersex, and also the way in which intersex people were sort of treated medically to make them fit into a physiological mold that medical professionals feel like they should have. So, and that was really interesting, learning about how a lot of intersex people don't feel as if they can just embrace being intersex. From a really young age, when they were children, they were already going through surgery and procedures to try and get them to align with the physiology of the binary of, you have to have a quote male anatomy or a female anatomy, and that was just hugely eye-opening, and gave me a really sort of deep appreciation for essentially what is, child consent around medical procedures that will then really heavily affect their lives later on. But something that has really stuck with me is when I interviewed a woman called Mary Birch, who I mentioned before. She's the 71-year-old woman who delivers diversity and inclusion training, specifically around LGBTQIA plus topics. And she does that under an organisation called OLGA, which used to stand for Older Lesbian Gay Association, but now the full length title includes non-binary and transgender people in that too. And she painted a really bleak picture of the older community's experiences in institutions like hospitals and care homes, where she will often get calls from these places saying, we have a transgender person here, we don't know how to treat them. And she'll reply with, well, just treat them like a regular patient, because that's all that they are. And she herself has expressed that she's concerned about ever having to go into a hospital or a care home. And the general experience from the older community is that sometimes they have to go back into the closet because they don't feel safe being out about their identity. And unfortunately at the moment, particularly in care homes, for example, they are also put into an environment where they are with a generation of people where the LGBTQIA plus community were really heavily oppressed. And so a lot of those opinions are still held by other residents in the care home. And that's just something I've never thought about before, because I'm on the other end of the age spectrum. So I've just not thought about what it would be like if I reached that age, and then what it would be like if I did have to go into a care home, or if I needed to go into hospital. And actually now, with my own transgender experience, I'm starting to understand that I mean, there just probably will be times when I will have to go to a hospital, and what's that experience going to be like for me? And so there's some anxiety there that sort of started to build around it, but also it's also driving me to want to help with that training at some point. And I don't quite know when I can do that, but getting diversity and inclusion trained for me seems like something that is starting to climb up my ladder of priorities, because it will, for me, it feels like a way in which I can make a bigger impact for the wider community, and also provide a platform and a resource in which the places that I go into to provide the training can have an opportunity to ask questions, but then also, I guess, abolish all of the misinformation that they might have heard from other places. Speaking to Mary, it became very apparent that she feels as if the younger generations need to take this over. I mean, she's in her 70s. She said herself that she's getting tired. She can't travel as far. And, all the people who work for the organisation are of a similar age, because they all kind of set it up together and they're all aging together. So there needs to be a handing over of the baton. And that's something that is just simmering in the back of my mind constantly, wondering whether I'm the right person to take that baton, or whether there's sort of another way in which I can contribute and help with that. But yeah, that's something that has really stayed with me ever since we interviewed her in Scarborough. So that was quite early on in the trip, and I just sort of remember carrying that with me quite a lot throughout the trip, and just mulling over that and speaking to you, Frankie, about that quite a bit, because yeah, it's just not something that we often talk about or think about, because we're in our 20s and 30s. So it's a life experience that feels quite far away, but also feels very feasible, and it feels like a realistic thing that could happen to us. It's something that could become a part of our reality. So it's something that I feel like we need to think about.
Can I add on to that question as well?
Yes, of course.
It's kind of on a completely separate track to what you were talking about, actually, but I was going to add on that at the end of every interview, you'd ask people to give advice for like other members of the community, and then as well to give advice to allies. And I think something that really surprised me was how many people spoke about the power of allies and how important allies are in protecting the community and supporting the community, and in ensuring that we get equal rights. And I think that's really important. And allyship can just be as simple as like not assuming that your kids are straight. It could be as simple as making sure that you're creating a home that is like a queer-friendly environment, not assuming that your kids' friends are straight automatically. You know, asking if someone has a boyfriend or a girlfriend is like super assuming, and then might make that space feel unsafe for someone who is very young and processing what they're going through. It can make it quite hard for them to then feel comfortable with who they are. And then it can go from that right the way through to the fact that there are so many places where queer rights are still under attack very much, don't have necessarily equal access to healthcare or to the medical care we need. As you spoke about, the access to medical care in care homes, to marriage, there are so many areas where we need to be vocal, where we need to protect and defend our rights. But also quite often we're coming from a very small community or a very small place where there are people in the community who feel that they have the strength and the safety to stand up and raise their voice. So having people who are safe to stand up and raise their voice with us and to amplify our voices can have such a huge impact.
I'm just thinking about that point you made about children, and actually, you know, I think that's certainly something that I think, particularly having slightly older children, sort of coming to the tail end of primary years, and up until this point probably hadn't really come into sort of, I guess, into that sort of part of my world in that sense. And recently, as an example, you know, my son's in year 6 and they're about to do, I can't remember the term they give it now, but PSHE, I think it's, you know, the sex and health education, except they don't call it that. They did a meeting the other night and they're sort of saying, well, this is how we do it. And we speak to the boys separately and we speak to the girls separately about it. That at what stage, I wonder, do schools, you know, they were being very sensitive about what the parents might be concerned about, you know, asking about same-sex relationships or, you know, and I was just, it was quite a bizarre experience because I was sort of sitting there going, at what point does it start to be a responsibility of the school and of the parents to be able to recognize their own prejudices and biases, and we all have them, and without even realizing it. And it was, you know, I suppose, sorry, I'm rambling slightly, but I just think that I'll keep going. But I think that point about when my children use terminology that I know is not acceptable, that when they, you know, they come home and ask me questions about me being in a place to answer some of them, but not being in a place to answer all of them. And I guess it's that sort of, maybe what I'm trying to say is recognizing in yourself your own lack of knowledge, your own biases, your own limited experience in areas, and that's also why what you're doing is so important, because actually it's extending those experiences and narratives to everybody. It's not just for people within the community who already have these experiences, but all of those of us who have children who have experienced these sort of questions have a place to go, actually, I need to reflect on this for myself. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, that was a very long ramble, but
no, it does. It does make a lot of sense. And as you were talking there, it pinged off so many things in my head. Some of them were something that I really want to advocate really loudly for is that kids know who they are. And, I think we have a way in our society of thinking or viewing of children as being so young and infantile that, that they don't really know what they like and they don't really know what's best for them. And to a degree, they don't. But in terms of the things that they like, the things that they enjoy, and in terms of their own personality, they know fundamentally who they are. And what I have begun to really understand for myself and from listening to other people's stories and journeys is that really what happens is that your fundamental understanding of yourself starts to become squashed and narrowed and restricted by who you think you should be as you grow up. And as you become more self-conscious in your adolescence and you're surrounded by other adolescent teenagers, and there really is a fundamental feeling of peer pressure to fit in. And all you want to do as a kid is fit in. And so, children are incredible in terms of the fact that they can absorb so much information, but it also means that they're really moldable and adaptable. And so if they feel like they don't fit in, they'll do everything they can to fit in. And that can really mean that huge parts of their identity just become sidelined. But it doesn't mean that it's ever forgotten. And so they grow up into these adults where, again, they feel as if their identities are sidelined and that they're not able to fully embrace who they are. But deep down, they still know who they are. And I think a thing that I've just become very aware of is that we potentially need to give our kids more credit for understanding who they are and the things that they like, and trying as parents to or as guardians to allow them to explore that in a safe environment. But you're right, the fact is that a lot of us have grown up in a society which doesn't advocate for that, or sort of somewhat does, but really the societal overtones that we all kind of need to behave a certain way and be a certain way. So we're trying to unlearn through trying to be better role models and guardians and parents for the younger generation. And that's really hard, because not only are we trying to look after other people, we're also trying to be a better version of ourselves. So I appreciate that it's like a double whammy. But it's from experiences of our friends with kids. So one of our friends called us up because their kid was expressing that they perhaps were questioning their sexuality. I think they were 11 at the time, and our friend called us up and said, I don't know what to say about this, so I'm calling you two so that you can talk to my kid and reassure them that it's okay, but I don't really know what the wording is or what to say about it, so I just felt like it'd be best to call you. And I loved that. We had such a great conversation together where we were like, okay, so tell us what's going on. And, okay, well, that's totally fine. Like, it's, totally fine if like you're having these feelings, and, just like keep hanging out with this person and see where it goes. And it was just such a cute conversation. We were like, what would you like to do? And then they were like, I'd just like to give them a kiss on the cheek and hold their hand. And I was like, oh my God, my poor heart. And so the fact is that we know that like kids have these feelings and these attractions, and it's just giving them permission to explore that in a way that is safe and in a way that really empowers them. But again, as I said, I do appreciate that's difficult for us as adults to always do a consistently 100% job, because we're still going along this process with them. So if I can suggest one thing, it's just to try your best, and your best is always good enough, because I feel as if kids pick up on that too. They appreciate that you are trying, and that then gives them permission to just keep going down the route that they want to go down, but with the knowledge that they can come to you if they have questions or if they need support. I think there's nothing better than just seeing a kid who is just able to feel comfortable and to be themselves. I don't know where to end that sentence. I feel like I could ramble about that for a while. Maybe I've just matched your ramble there.
Yes, I set the tone of rambling, so it's all right. We can keep going. I think, that point about safety is so important, and that even if you don't know, that being open to that too, maybe being, that you're not creating a space where people feel, and particularly for children, but for adults as well, that they're getting it wrong, that, like you said, it's something that people have got to hide, or they've got to conform, is being projected, or that they feel is being projected from you. I guess sort of leading on to that then, because I know at the end of this, there are going to be people who've listened to this and just go, what you're doing sounds absolutely incredible. Where can they go to find out more about your crowdfunder? I know it's ending soon, so the time pressure is on, but where can they go and support you and support your incredible work as well?
Yeah, I'll start first with the crowdfunder is super important. And yes, it is coming to a close soon. I think there's 2
weeks from today.
2 weeks from today.
Wow. 9th of November.
So that is super important to please head there. But also the page will remain on the internet even after it's closed. So even if somebody is listening to it after it's closed, you can head over there, and there is like a little video that's a bit of a trailer, and you can hear some of the voices from some of the interviews and see a little bit more about what the trip involved. So definitely head over to the page and have a watch of the trailer. It's super cool to watch. And the link for that, I'm sure you put it in, but it's igg.me igg.me/AT/glide-for-pride.
Oh, and no, you don't need to remember that, because we will put it in the show notes.
And then otherwise, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Frankie_Dewar.
And I am on Instagram, Frit Tam. And my film studio, Passionfruit Pictures, is also on Instagram at Passionfruit Pictures _. But yeah, as you said, the crowdfunder has been an experience. But it's been amazing. I've basically now spend every day talking to people about queer related topics, and that is just a dream. And just sharing stories via doing Insta lives with members of the community that I wasn't able to interview on the trip, or hosting online panels with some of the interviews that I did meet on my trip, and just sharing these stories. That's the whole aim of the game, is just to keep sharing stories. So we're just over halfway with our crowdfunder now, and the time pressure will begin shortly, I'm sure. At the moment, I still feel a little bit like, okay, we've still got 2 weeks. Once we get into that last week, I think I'll start feeling a little bit tetchy. But yeah, all of the money goes towards just making the film possible. It just pays the people who came to film with me on my trip. It pays for the editing and the distribution of the film, and it just helps to make this film a reality, so that it's not just my story that's being shared through the film, but it's the 30 plus English stories, British stories that we heard along the way too. And I just want to show that we are everywhere, that our community is spread really far and wide, and we have stories to share, really important stories to share. So if anyone has a few pounds that they'd like to put towards the crowdfunder, we'd be so grateful. And yeah, you're just getting us ever closer to just making this film a reality. So just a huge thank you in advance to anyone who listens to this and then goes over to donate.
Amazing. And yeah, totally encourage everyone to go over and donate. I think it starts at £3 is your lowest amount that you can put in, which, like I said, buy them a cup of coffee. I think after all that rollerblading, you definitely deserve it. So Frit, Frankie, thank you so much for coming on and for such an incredible episode, and for, you know, sharing not only the stories that you've heard, but your own stories as well, and just for your honesty with that too. Appreciate it so much, and I just wish you all the very, very best with I can't wait to see the film when it comes out. We have to get you back on then to talk about it. I love that the Crowdfunder has also been part of the adventure too, like you said, the whole thing. So thank you again. It's been so lovely to speak to you both, and I hope to catch up with you again very soon. Take care.
Thanks
you so much.
Bye. So once again, I just want to say a massive thank you to Frit and Frankie for taking the time to talk to me about their experiences, and for such honesty and openness in discussing so many aspects of the trip, of the expedition, as we're now calling it. And, you know, for really sharing what actually it was like to take on such a big event, and to live through that. And just going back to Frankie's point that she made, that there is such a narrative out there about how going on an expedition or doing something amazing outdoors can change your life. And that's absolutely true in so many cases. But I think, you know, that point that actually you still carry on being you, that whilst you might be able to escape or distract for a while, the reality is that unless we deal with what is really happening for us, what we are really experiencing, and whether that is on a mental health side of things, or whether, you know, it's about our personal situation, and you know, we're trying to find a way out of that, whatever it might be, that adventure and the outdoors can be a wonderful tool to help with that, but it's not the whole picture. And I think what Frit's experience really showed there was that actually the real magic, or the real power, is also found in taking yourself along with you on that journey. And I think also that there is the other bit that we tend not to talk about so much, is how important it is to have those strong relationships. I think that was the thing that came through for me so powerfully in that conversation, was the incredible relationship that Frit and Frankie have, and how, despite all the challenges and the difficulties, that they find a way to navigate that together. And that having that support, that whether it is encouragement, whether it is someone who's telling you to stop, whether it is, you know, someone who's there can sit alongside you and help you to bear something really painful, is so critical to our resilience, that we're not designed to do this alone. And that actually that is where the strength often comes from too. So I'm going to leave it there, because I'm very conscious this was a much longer episode than usual. I felt it was so important to give as much time as possible to both Frit and Frankie to share their stories. But I know you've stuck with me for quite a while now. So thank you so much for listening if you have got to this point. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast as well. I can't tell you how much it means. If, as always, you'd like to get in touch, you want to pick up on any of the topics that we discussed today, if you want to have a conversation, please do reach out. You can find me on Instagram, Resilience at Work, and the Everyday Adventure Pod. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass, or you can find me via my website, resiliencwork.co.uk, and drop me a message through there. I would love to hear from you. If you have enjoyed this episode, if you are enjoying the podcast, please do leave a review. It means so much. And if you would like to take part in a real life adventure and you're not sure where to start, or you're ready to get out and try something new, then I'm so excited that will be running my first ever winter resilience workshop, which is taking place in Scandinavia on the Norway-Swedish border in March of next year. So in March 2022, we will be spending from Wednesday to Sunday. We will be camping out in expedition tents, pulling pulks. If you've ever fancied being an Arctic explorer, this is the time to give it a try. It is a super fun and incredible experience. I did the recce back in February of 2019, and honestly, the scenery and the experience, the stillness, and what I learned just blew me away. We're partnering with a wonderful expert in this area, Arctic training and expeditions. Petter is ex-Norwegian Special Forces, but is super relaxed. He's a real foodie. So if you like your food, this is the one for you. And we will just have the most amazing time. So please reach out to me as well and get in touch if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I will leave you there, and I hope to catch up with you again next week. We'll be back with another incredible everyday adventurer, and I look forward to speaking to you then. Take care. Bye.